Well, good evening, everyone. I know it has been a packed day full of lots of interesting information, and so I appreciate you participating in really a very big issue on campuses, and you know the media has been really paying a lot of attention. With a raise of hands, could you please let us know a little bit who our audience is? So if you are administrative faculty, please raise your hand. If you are teaching faculty, please raise your hand. Okay. And who has been or is involved in investigations? Okay, no. That will kind of give us a good sense. So Title IX, as you well know, is definitely part of the discussion in higher ed and also on a federal level. Let me introduce you to our presenter, Greer Saunders. She is a native Richmonder who heads the VCCS office, a system office for counsel. She worked at the Office of the Attorney General as legal representative for various higher education institutions and statewide coordinator for domestic violence initiatives, and also coordinated the office's efforts to combat sexual and domestic violence. She has her undergraduate degree from the Virginia VCU, and is a graduate from my alma mater, George Washington University, and a Juris Doctor degree from Washington and Lee University School of Law. So without further ado, I'm sure that we are all very interested in hearing the top 10 of Title IX. I'll give you Greer Saunders.
Thank you. Thank you.
And please, logistically speaking, yes, we know that you will have questions. We love to have your questions, but please could you raise your hand? Because of this live streaming, it is very important that those who are not physically here really hear you and hear the question. So feel free to ask a question, but raise your hand so we can get the mic to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. It is the last presentation of the day. I am the only thing keeping you from the reception. Thanks, Abby. I don't know what to do. What am I doing? This is great. Do I push? Yeah, I'm pushing it out. Nothing's working. Okay. So, number 10.
Yes.
You mean this isn't about sports? No, it isn't about sports anymore. I remember my first Title IX presentation in 1999, and it was about sports. But that was long ago. And as you know, we are speaking of mostly sexual assault on campus, but it encompasses a range of, types of sex discrimination. So Title IX is a 1972 law that prohibits discrimination based on sex in education programs and activities that receive federal financial assistance. You might have heard of the acronym OCR, that stands for the Office for Civil Rights. It's within the U.S. Department of Education, and it enforces Title IX. Title IX also prohibits employment discrimination, but if you file a complaint of employment discrimination, the EEOC will handle that complaint. Okay. This is great. It's not mine. Examples of sex discrimination include sexual harassment, sexual misconduct, and pregnancy discrimination. This isn't going to work. I'm going to be in the way. Hey, great. What did I do right?
You stood on the right side.
Great. All right, I'll just stay here.
Oh, yeah.
Our responsibilities as VCCS and colleges within the VCCS is to take immediate and appropriate action to investigate and determine what occurred when the college knows or reasonably should know of possible sex discrimination. if it has occurred, we must take prompt and effective steps to end the discrimination, prevent its reoccurrence, and address its effects. Great. Much of what people say when they say Title IX training, it really is campus safe training. Title IX training really doesn't exist in the law. If you read the law, it's really merely a paragraph. If you read Title IX regulations, there are no requirements for training. OCR recommends training. The White House has its own website, notalone.gov. It recommends training and best practices for colleges and universities to do. But Campus Safe actually has in the statute training requirements. So that's important to know, because there might be some vendors out there that will provide you with Title IX training. Just make sure it includes the Campus Safe Act statutory requirements. Okay? Now, Campus Safe Act governs actions taken by institutions in cases of alleged sexual assault, dating violence, domestic violence, and stalking. Number 9. I want to talk about a little bit of my personal experiences in my tenure as my role as domestic violence coordinator with the AG's office, my tenure in higher ed. Most of it has been sexual harassment. And a lot of it has been consensual relations between faculty and student. And it has never ended well. Now, I'm sure if I asked you in the audience, someone would know of a case where someone met at school and they fell in love and everything is great. Those are rare occurrences. Many times they just don't end well. Even if you are dating your colleagues, a lot of times things just get messy at work. So, and I believe a policy is coming up pretty soon where we are going to have some language to prohibit consensual relations between faculty and students, and have some exceptions for our smaller colleges where it's pretty almost impossible not to have someone you know in your classroom. Not to say that it would be okay to date, but again, we realize that with the smaller colleges, it's going to be difficult not to have someone you know from your family, things of that nature, in your classroom. Sexual assault, I've had gropings. I've had someone is sexually assaulted in the parking lot, waiting at the bus stop, I should say. Sexual assaults occurring in the dorm rooms. Counted as very fortunate, my friends, that we do not have dorms and we do not have fraternities. Many of you, I'm sure, have heard the number 1 in 5, correct? I commend to you the Bureau of Justice Statistics Special Report. It is from 1993 to 2013. It's very comprehensive. It actually discusses the other surveys that we have heard, including the 1 in 5 statistic. In this, it's, now of course 1 is too many, but this number is a lot lower than the 1 in 5 number. And interestingly enough, it shows that the rate of rape and sexual assault for non-students is higher than for students. Not surprisingly, most victims know their assaulter. Number 8. Yes, we do need a policy. In fact, if we don't have a policy, we would be in violation. Those are a lot of words up there. It's a long way of saying that we are not going to discriminate based on gender or any other non-merit factor. It applies to everyone: students, faculty, staff, and third parties, contractors, visitors, for example. It also can apply to conduct that occurs off campus if it has an effect on campus. So with each violation, if it comes to our attention, if it happens off campus, we will assess whether or not it has that effect and then determine whether or not we need to make an investigation and take any other action. Again, a lot of words are up there, but basically we're not going to retaliate against anyone who files a report, who serves as a witness at any hearing or anything like that. And if one does retaliate, you can be sanctioned under this policy. Number 7. We're talking about definitions. Sexual harassment. Sexual harassment is defined as unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and other verbal, nonverbal, or physical conduct of a sexual nature. The quid pro quo, I'm not really sure how often that happens anymore. I'm sure sometimes it does, but most of what I see, and I believe most of what we see throughout the country is the sexual harassment, hostile environment type. And that's conduct that's so severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive that it undermines and detracts from an employee's work performance or student's educational experience. Sexual misconduct describes a range of behaviors that includes sexual harassment, sexual assault, sexual exploitation. Another word for that is sexual violence. It's really just sexual gratification against one's will. Consent. This is the hotly contested word. When the reauthorization of VAWA was underway, and the regulations, during the comment period of the regulations, they could not come to a consensus of what consent meant. So they decided not to define it. They just gave up. So what they decided was to allow institutions to use the the locality jurisdiction's definition. So this is basically Virginia's law. Consent, and in Virginia law, it mostly tells you what consent is not necessarily what it is. For our policy, I added additional language to try to amplify the definition. So anyway, it's any sexual activity or sex act committed against one's will by the use of force, threat, intimidation, or ruse, or through one's mental incapacity or physical helplessness is without consent. It is knowing, voluntary, and clear permission by word or action to engage in mutually agreed upon sexual activity. So mental incapacity, you can read for yourself. You have to know the who, what, when, where, and why. You have to know what is going on in order to consent. Incapacity or incapacitation is not the same as intoxication, although you can become incapacitated through alcohol and drugs. Physical helplessness, you can read, unconsciousness or any other condition existing at the time which otherwise rendered the person physically unable to communicate, and unwillingness to act, and about which the accused knew or should have known. Again, physical helplessness can be achieved through the use of alcohol or drugs. Number 6. This is about the complaint procedures. What do you do if you believe that a policy violation has occurred, what happens when the college receives a complaint. Any employee who believes that he or she is a victim of a crime should report it to law enforcement. Now, you have the choice not to report it to law enforcement. No one will force you to report it to law enforcement. We encourage you to report it to law enforcement. It is a crime because we believe that law enforcement best handles these types of things, especially if it is a felony. There's new legislation coming out. It is still pending. This session, I'm sure you all are aware of all of the legislation that came through related to sexual assault, and a lot of it related to reporting requirements. So the governor made some amendments, and they're still working on it. So the final version isn't out yet. But in some form, we're going to have a threat assessment committee to determine whether or not, even if the victim doesn't want to report it to the police, the college will have to report it to either the police or the Commonwealth attorney. Excuse me. So, employees should also report crimes defined under this policy and other policy violations to the Title IX coordinator. That should also say students. The Title IX coordinator will assist members of the campus community in reporting incidents to law enforcement if they want to. It's important to know that because of our obligations to investigate these violations and to end discrimination, we cannot guarantee confidentiality. If a potential victim of a policy violation or a crime wants to have confidentiality, that person is recommended to go to a clergy or a licensed counselor or someone else that has a privilege. The Title IX coordinator cannot maintain confidentiality. We're going to talk a little bit about responsible employees later on. A responsible employee cannot maintain confidentiality. I just said that. It's also important to know that don't conflate confidentiality with privacy or prudence, or keeping your information on a need-to-know basis. We're not going to tell everyone who you are and all the facts of your situation if they don't need to know. This is probably the most important point that I think I need to make. The college has a responsibility to provide a prompt, fair, and impartial investigation and resolution of violations to the policy. Okay? People involved with the resolution of a complaint must have annual training. That is coming out of OCR guidance, and that's what they call a must-have. OCR came out with, I want to say maybe 52 pages. And they make clear what they consider must-haves, what colleges and universities must do, and should-haves, what they recommend, what they consider best practices. Okay? This annual training is a must-have. We do have the option of resolving some complaints informally. Some issues are not well suited for informal processes, such as domestic violence or sexual assault. But in some cases, for example, sexual harassment cases may be resolved informally. But for the most part, the more serious charges are going to be resolved formally. The most important takeaway here is both parties will have an advisor of their choosing at each meeting. That could be an attorney. but it doesn't have to be. Sanctions run from education to dismissal. I have one college that is pretty good at having students write a paper on what they have learned from their experience. I haven't seen it yet on a sexual assault case, but a lot of misconduct, the college has students write a paper on the experience of what they have learned from their misbehavior and how they are going to move forward from that experience. And I think that's good. You know, we are an educational institution, and I think sometimes it's good not to just punish someone. Number 5. So this is risk reduction and bystander intervention. These are topics that are required from the Campus SAVE Act. And when I go through this, some of it might seem like common sense, but when you add alcohol, then everything goes out the window. So, for example, and by the way, these are tips adopted from the Association for Title IX Administrators. Number 1, if you have limits, make them known as early as possible. Number 2, tell someone no clearly and firmly. Number 3, if something doesn't feel right, leave. Number 4, take affirmative responsibility for your alcohol intake or drug use and acknowledge that alcohol and drugs lower your sexual inhibitions, compromise your judgment, and may make you vulnerable to someone who views a drunk or high person as a sexual opportunity. Number 5, use the buddy system. A real friend would challenge you if you are about to make a mistake, and respect them when they do. Now here's the other side. Clearly communicate your intentions and give the other person a chance to clearly relate intentions to you. For some reason, I remembered back in high school, just 2 days ago, I was talking to my colleague, Tom Cantone, that I didn't go to the prom. I'm not sure how we got on that topic. I didn't go to the prom, but a really good-looking boy did ask me. And he said, you know, you do realize that if we go, you're going to have sex with me. And he's kind of shaking his head. And I said, well, no. Well, he was taking that advice. He was clearly making his intentions known. So you got to give him credit for that. Understand and respect personal boundaries. Do not make assumptions about consent, about someone's sexual availability, about whether the person is attracted to you, about how far you can go, or about whether that person is physically and or mentally able to consent. If there are any questions or ambiguity, then you do not have consent. Don't take advantage of someone's drunkenness or drugged state. Take affirmative action or affirmative responsibility for your alcohol intake. Understand that consent to some form of sexual behavior is not consent to any other form of sexual behavior. Is anyone in the room like an advisor to a student group, a student organization? This might be helpful tips for you to tell your student group. A quick story. I know we don't have a lot of time. These are the same things my platoon commander told us when I was in the Marine Corps years ago. Take care of each other. Take care of yourself. Don't get too drunk. Take It is basically stuff that should come really naturally to everybody. And it's maybe a conversation that parents have with their kids, but these are conversations that I guess we have to have with our students nowadays. Really quickly, warning signs of abusive behavior. And I put this here because I've had a couple of situations where domestic violence situations had occurred, or I should say dating violence, and or sexual harassment. And they were prolonged, I thought, a little longer than it should have been because the signs were there. And I just thought, you know, if the faculty member sort of could have seen or known the signs, maybe it could have stopped sooner. So a real life example happened, I think, last year at the Student Leadership Conference. And they kind of saw some of this, you know, controlling behavior from a couple that was at the conference. And I thought it was a really good thing that they did. I mean, they kind of took the girl aside and asked her, you know, is everything okay? Anyway, jealousy, controlling behavior, isolation is a big one. Hypersensitivity, and the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde personality is another one. Warning signs of sexual assault. Not respecting established boundaries, pressuring you to drink or to have sex, taking steps to isolate you. Isolation, again, is a big one. And intoxication. I wanted just to make sure that everyone knows that these risk factors do not mean that everyone's going to be a rapist, you know, who might come up with one or two of these risk factors. And these are from the Centers for Disease Control. And so these are some individual risk factors that they note for sexual violence. Again, sort of the same theme that we've seen before. Bystander intervention is a very extensive program, and what I am about to tell you today doesn't even scratch the surface. If you want to get involved again, especially if you are a faculty advisor for a student group, this might be something you might be interested in and bring into your campus. They do cost money, so that's something to be aware of. Again, going back to my Marine Corps days, you know, this is the Stop Being a Jerk campaign. We have the Don't Be That Guy campaign. So the basic idea is for people not to be afraid to step in when they see something wrong. So notice an incident, evaluate the incident, and then take responsibility for intervening. Some of the strategies that are discussed during the, again, very extensive bystander intervention programs. One is direct, just directly go up to a person and talk to them. Interrupt that, whatever is going on. If the person is drunk, it notes that this strategy probably doesn't work very well. Distract might be another technique that you may use. I know women like to go to the restroom together. So if you see a friend cornered somewhere with a guy and it doesn't look like a good situation, you just pull her aside, hey, I need to fix my makeup. If you're not comfortable doing anything yourself, maybe you have a friend that you can ask him or her to do something, just delegate. And then delay. Do whatever you need to do to keep them in sight. Number 4. This goes without saying, if someone has experienced sexual assault or is experiencing sexual harassment or is under investigation for such, it is going to affect their work or their studies. You're going to see it. So, sexual harassment and free speech. I talk about this topic a lot in my freedom of expression or social media presentations. because they're related. And it is a topic, along with sexual assault, hostile environment is a topic that we are discussing in our nation today with the fraternity rant on video, So it's not just sexual harassment, it's just, racial harassment. And the topic of free speech. And I was reading, I think it was the Washington Post, where legal scholars opined that if the students sued, they would stand a good chance of winning. So here it is. Conduct that constitutes sexual harassment is unlawful. But a lot of speech that is offensive is protected speech. We don't like it. No one says we have to like it, but it's protected speech. Speech that is offensive, inappropriate, profane is protected speech. So remember that the test isn't whether or not someone is offensive. The test is whether the speech is severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive, that it detracts from the educational experience or the work experience from the definition from earlier in the presentation. Okay? Now, just very quickly, how this can be can be manifested in the classroom. Real life cases here. A combat veteran attends Temple University, and he is in a military history course. And the topic is women in combat. And he has a particular viewpoint on that. And so he reads the university's sexual harassment policy, and he is afraid to speak up in class because he's afraid he might violate the policy. And he sues, and he wins. Because the court said that the policy was overbroad in that it not only prohibited unprotected speech, it prohibited protected speech. It was overbroad. It's what we call in the law overbreadth doctrine. So it's important to stay true to the definition that I gave you earlier and not try to expand it to broaden the definition, because you're going to, if let's say, try to envision a net, and you're going to get the protected speech within that net. Number two, there was a student in a literature course, and at some point they were studying lesbian literature, or maybe it was just a lesbian literature course. And as part of the curriculum, the students had to watch a lesbian film, and I think it was Desert Hearts. I don't know if anyone has seen that. Maybe I got it wrong, but I believe it's Desert Hearts. Well, the student just really critiqued it really bad, and she had no kind words for this film. And her professor considered it hate speech. Well, and she failed. Student sued, and she won. It's protected speech. Lastly, there's a class on pornography, and a student signs up for the class, and during the class, the professor shows images of pornography in the pornography class. And the student says she's offended, and she feels like she's being sexually harassed. What do you think the result of that was? Yeah. It didn't come out. I wasn't consulted. This is one of our colleges. I wasn't consulted, but she was allowed to withdraw past the ad drop period, and she received a tuition refund. If they had consulted with me, I would have said no. So anyway, it's not sexual harassment. Why? Because she's storing it for a pedagogical reason, not to, intimidate or to offend or something like that. That's just one of my favorite quotes from Noam. Number 2. And all I'll say about this is this. I know no one wants anyone to be sexually harassed and especially sexually assaulted. But we have to make sure we give due process to the accused. Remember, we have the obligation to provide a fair and impartial process. UVA fraternity, Duke lacrosse. It happens. And to this day, I'm not sure if anyone has apologized to the fraternity at UVA. Number 1. You are responsible employees, not because you come to work on time, but because you have the authority to take action to redress alleged violations of this policy. You are either designated as a responsible employee, or you're probably someone who someone else reasonably believes is a responsible employee. Your faculty administrators, students are probably going to think that you have the authority to do something. They probably are going to come to you. And so if you receive a report, you have the obligation to forward those reports to the Title IX coordinator. Again, make sure you tell them before they start, because if they have the assumption that you're going to keep it a secret, just to make sure you know, I have to forward this to the Title IX coordinator. Okay? Get the basic information: who, what, when, where, and how. Okay? Date, time, location of the incident. That's not an investigation. Don't go any further than that. Now, starting July 1st, and again, the governor made some amendments. He sent it back. I think they call it conferees. I'm pretty sure, however, this is going to stay the same. So if you obtain any information that an act of sexual violence may have occurred, you have to report that information to the Title IX coordinator. It's not enough to wait for a report to come to you. If you get a whiff of it in the hall, as a matter of fact, I had a really bad groping. It was a really bad groping / sexual harassment, hostile environment case that came to light because I think it was the dean heard some people talking in the hall. Okay? You will have the obligation to forward that information to the Title IX coordinator starting July 1st. But isn't it good to know that it didn't take legislation for that dean to do that anyway? Oh, let me go back. Okay, as soon as practical after addressing the immediate needs of the victim. So what is that? Make sure that person is safe. Call 911 or campus police. If, friends, family, get someone there to take care of them. Go to the nearest medical facility. You can call the Virginia Family Violence and Sexual Assault Hotline. Pretty soon, we are going to have MOUs with local sexual assault crisis centers. That's another piece of legislation coming up. So that's going to be all automatic anyway. Get that sexual assault crisis advocate and either send her there, or they'll probably come on campus if it happens on campus. And encourage the individual and the crisis counselor would probably tell her or him this: it's important to preserve any evidence. You do not have to make the decision that right then and there to follow through with pressing charges. Get the evidence, and then you have time to decide. You don't have to decide X or A through Z that night. Okay? Get help, get the medical attention, get the rape kit, and then you can decide what you want to do after that. That's the recommendation most people will give you. All right, you're going to have, this is Campus Save, we have to do this anyway. You're going to have a list of resources that are available. If you need accommodations in your academic, parking, or working arrangements, if they are reasonably available and you ask, we will try to accommodate. All right, we have 15 minutes for, great, I think that was pretty much perfect. I'm surprised there weren't more questions during the presentation, because the last time I did this, I was peppered with questions throughout. Yes?
Do you have a question?
Hi. What is there any kind of information or about the sort of time period? In other words, if a student reports an immediate incident, I've got that, so this happened last night or this just happened. But what if a student discloses something that happened a year ago or a month ago or 5 years ago, or is there any sort of reporting?
Statute of limitations.
Statute of limitations. What's the reporting responsibility?
For the school, there is none, but realistically, the longer you take, the less we'll probably be able to do with that, because the evidence fades, and it's just like in the criminal law. With murders, there's no statute of limitations with murder, but you have the limitations on that. And actually, that statement is in our policy. There's no limitations, but just realize the longer the time between the incident and the report is going to inhibit our investigation.
But I should still be reporting it to the Title IX coordinator, even if a student discloses to me that this happened.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
In the past, I should still be disclosing it, even reporting it, even if it was 5 years ago.
Correct.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
If a student comes to you and the first thing they tell you is, I would like confidence in our discussion, at what point do I say that depends on our discussion? Because if I tell them that I'm required to report certain information, they will close down,
Mm-hmm.
quite possibly.
Mm-hmm.
Thus, I've ended the opportunity for that discussion.
Can you point them to a counselor or a clergy or someone else that can maintain that confidentiality?
Again, it depends on the relationship with the student. The student may feel that they're comfortable with that individual, which is why they're asking for confidence. Mm-hmm. Now, the counselor that I'm referring them to, they may be a wonderful person, but at the end of the day, they haven't built that relationship. So in the meantime, time is ticking.
Yeah, it's a tough call. I think if you are not designated as a responsible employee, as designated, there are designees and there are people who are assumed to be responsible employees. You may be able to get rid of it, but it's sketchy, and I don't recommend it. I recommend referring the student to someone who has that privilege.
Wonderful presentation, by the way.
Thank you.
My name is Brian Clark, and I'm an assistant professor of health, physical education, and biology at New River Community College. And formerly, I was the peer group coordinator for the health and physical education group. And at previous peer group conferences, there were numerous discussions about the safety unit. In almost all Health 110 and 116 classes, there's a unit on safety. And what do you feel would be is there a standardized course? Is there standardized information that should be included in a safety unit in a health class?
That's a good question. I don't know if I can answer that. When you say safety class, what types? What's the curriculum like?
The two primary health classes that are taught in the VCCS are Health 110 and 116. And in both of those classes, by far and large, not that it's a requirement, but by far and large, you will find a safety unit in those classes. So the professors, instructors of those courses teach a unit on safety. And most of us cover sexual violence. And what I found, and the reason I'm asking is because the manner in which I teach my safety unit, I found in discussing with my peers, is not the same as some of my peers teach their safety unit. So I'm wondering, where should we look? Should we all, throughout the entire state, in the health classes, should we be teaching it exactly the same? Should we be using the exact same curriculum? Is there a standardized, is there standardized material out there that we can purchase? That is a training program that we could just implement in Health 110 and or 116?
There probably is some curriculum that you can purchase because, let's face it, it's a college industry now, Title IX and related information. The stuff that I found that's helpful, that I use for my risk reduction, it came from the Association for Title IX Administrators. I thought that was helpful. I've seen stuff that I don't recommend. I think, go on the White House website. They probably have some of the best practices that you can use, and they have a list of resources, I think, is a good starting point. But I guess mostly I would recommend not adding things like, this is what I've seen. Carry a gun. Park your car under a light. These are things that probably aren't very helpful. When you think about it, you can't even carry a gun on campus, so it's not, the traditional safety, take a judo course or something. I'm thinking more in terms of, again, what I learned when I was in the Marine Corps was buddy system, just common sense, don't be alone, drinking responsibly. And I know that's controversial because people think you're blaming the victim, but you really aren't. It's just like common sense tips that we can tell our young people. I told a story in one of my other presentations about how young people actually do listen to us. The story of a group of women, young women, going out in Shuckles Bottom in Richmond. It's a hangout night area in Richmond area, and they rented a van because they didn't want to drink and drive. Well, there's a double-edged sword to that because it almost gives you permission to drink even more when you're not driving, right? So they go out, and they're just, they're 3 sheets to the wind. So much so, when they go back, they don't even know that one of them is missing. And she's off in a ditch somewhere. Literally, she's in a ditch. And thankfully, a police officer finds her and takes her to the hospital. Mom comes, and she says, "What in the world were you thinking?" And she says, "Mom, we weren't driving." So the idea of not drinking and driving, they get. So, but if we tell them, if we drive home the idea, drink responsibly, they eventually would get that too. So I would go on the website and see what kinds of resources they have on that. And I think our Virginia Sexual Domestic Violence Alliance, I think they do a pretty good job as well. Notalone.gov, I believe it is. Mm-hmm.
Don't go to whitehouse.com.
Huh?
Don't go to whitehouse.com.
No, that's not it.
Thank you. I'm from Rappahannock Community College, and I'm also an RN. Is there anything in VCCS policy that would prohibit me from following my requirement and responsibility to report cases of abuse or suspected abuse or neglect? The reason I ask is because I do have some students that are under 18 years old, and I do have some that are elderly. And they will come to me because I'm a nurse and because I'm their faculty member and their advisor and say, this is happening to me at home. I know a lot of our college processes likes to take a minute and assess what's going on, but from my RN background, I have to immediately respond.
Well, even as just a plain employee, if that person is a man, you have to report anyway. You just have to. So I would say, no, that policy can't trump the law.
One more question.
Okay, I'm Barbara Fuller from Southwest Virginia Community College. What is the implications for the Title IX with our dual enrollment students?
Mm-hmm. Well, Title IX applies to K through 12 as well, so they may be getting, I'm assuming they're getting some training, but if dual enrolled students are our students, and so if they're a student, they're students, so it doesn't really matter if they're dual enrolled or online. If we provide training to students, that includes all students. Yeah.